Professor Wergely's here. I'm recording after the lecture. We ran into a problem. We were getting some weird error here. Cannot find module planetdata.json in the assets directory. It says consider using resolve JSON module to import module with a .json extension. And you'll see there's a specific TypeScript error. So I can actually copy this error here and then come over here and paste it in the browser. You'll see I've already done it, but I'll do it again, paste it in the browser. And you'll see here, first one comes up, Stack Overflow. I don't usually like using Stack Overflow, but sometimes they're good, and in this case they were. You'll see it actually had a similar path that we did. And you'll see here's an answer with 12 likes. Not very confident, but in this case it did work. You'll see you should be placed under the compiler options in the TypeScript configuration.json as per the documentation. So what I like here is they actually included documentation. Usually if they include documentation, the results here in Stack Overflow are more reassuring. Okay, usually if they actually look at the documentation, then the answer is usually going to be right. Okay, a lot of the times if they include documentation, the answer will be right. So if I click over here, you'll see this is a new. And you know, I taught the course not too long ago, but every time I teach the course, Angular's updating, Ionic's updating, Bootstrap's updating, Angular Materials updating. So everything's updating. So each time I teach the course, everything's going to be updated. And last time I taught the course, I think we were on Angular 8. And now we're on Angular 10, so a lot has changed. And actually, we may have been on Angular 7. But anyway, you'll see here, if you're trying to import in the TypeScript in the compiler options, you will add resolve JSON module equal to true and ES module true. Okay, and you can actually read some of this, and it'll tell you a little bit about what's going on. And essentially, we'll just copy those lines. Okay, so I copied these lines here. They're a little bit easier to copy here, I think. These are kind of clickable links, so they're kind of hard to copy. And I'll come back over here to my code, go over to the TypeScript configuration file, put a comma here at the end, and then paste those two, and then save it. Now that'll fix some of your errors. Now remember, Angular, TypeScript, all the frameworks that we're using are continually updating. So that's one of the good and the bad things about using frameworks. The good thing is you'll see how much code we had to write with our first Angular application. We've written, this is our second or third application, but in our first one we wrote maybe 50 lines of code, and we had a complete working application, and we had a single page app with multiple components in it. Same here, we haven't actually written that many lines of code, and we have a nice application working so far. So the good thing about using a library framework is that it's easy to write the code. The bad thing is you want to stay up to date on them, and they're continually updating. So you continually have to make modifications. You continually have to update to the newest version, and sometimes that's hard to do. And that's the entire technology field. The entire technology field, you have to continuously stay updated. If you stay fixed or static to a particular version or a particular framework, you're going to get outdated quickly. So you need to be flexible, be willing to try new things, and that's how you're going to make it here in the technology world. So now if I come back to home page component, you'll see this is gone. This is a relative path. We used more of a like this path here, starting with source. It's not absolute because it doesn't start with a /. It's still relative, but it may look a little bit prettier instead of using the .. / which is going back a directory. So I'm going to change it back to the source just like we had before, and now you'll see this is working, but I still have an error, which it doesn't really know what planets with a capital P is. Now this is going to be a type, and you need to have these types for your challenge. Okay, it talks about having data types. You'll create a types directory, and then you'll have all your interfaces in them. We're going to do that now. This is very important for the challenge. So I'm going to do a Control-C, get out of the ngn serve, ng serve, and then I'm going to do an ng generate. And I'm going to generate an interface here. Okay, and in the challenge documentation, if you read, it says to do one called types / and the type we're going to have here is planet. So I can do planet with the lowercase p, that's okay. You'll see if I do a lowercase p, the file name will be lowercase p planet, but inside the interface will be with a capital P. So once I create the interface, if I come over here and import it, so now I'm going to import planets with a capital P from, and we can go from the current directory, do a dot / from the current directory, say we're in the home page, so we'd either have to go back a directory and go into our types, or we can always start from the source just like we did above. So source, we'll go into the app, and we'll go into types, and then we'll go into planet. Okay, let's see, I might have put planet without an S. Here I have planets with an S. Okay, this is planet without an S, so I can either put planets here with an S, but I also should change the file name. So you'll see it's planet here without an S, planets with an S. If you want to change it, you can do that easily. Just do another ng generate. Okay, which we should change it. The file name should match the class name. That's what we did in Java. That's what you do in object-oriented programming. That's what you should do here. So let's make a new one. Types / planets with an S. Okay, we can delete this old one. And then in here, we'll put planets with an S. And now it's implemented correctly. So now there's no error. We're importing planets, which is our JSON. Capital P planets is going to be a class or an interface. If you remember in 3330, object-oriented programming, there was particular naming conventions you had to do. Classes always start with an uppercase letter, followed by upper camel case, and interfaces do as well. So if I come in here, you'll see this is actually an interface. Interfaces also start with a capital letter. So if I come back to home page, planets with the lowercase p is our data. Planets with an uppercase P is going to be a class or an interface. And in this case, it's an interface. Now, you'll want to know about interfaces. So this is how you define a type in Angular. And what's nice about this is I can specify exactly what I want planet to be. So in this case, planet is going to have a name, which is going to be type string. It's going to have a color, which is going to be type string. It's going to have a radius, which is going to be a number. And it's also going to have satellites, which is going to be a number. Now, what's nice about this is, you'll see it ends with semicolons. What's nice about this is it defines exactly how planets should be. So if planets doesn't have one of these, or let's say it has an additional one, you're going to get an error. Now, these types are going to be the TypeScript types. So if I come back over here to the web, and I just search TypeScript types. Okay, you'll see basic types here. They don't have too many. You have number, you can have Boolean, string. Okay, it talks about interfaces here. Okay, it talks about literal types. Basic types is what you'll do. You'll see Boolean, number, string, array, tuple, enums, unknowns, any's. Okay, I don't usually see unknown, but I will see any used frequently. If the developer doesn't want to specify a type, you also have void and some others. Okay, you can also do objects and type assertions. Now, I see a lot of developers do any. You're not going to be able to do that on the challenge. You need to specify a type there. If you don't specify a type, you're going to get points deducted. This is the whole point of TypeScript. I would say if the developer puts any, they're more of a JavaScript developer. If they specify types, they're more of a Java developer or a TypeScript developer. Okay, and that's the whole point of TypeScript, is to define types. And that's where TypeScript shines. So here's our type, planets, and here's how you define it. Now, what's nice about this is you actually have a definition here. So you can get a compile error if it doesn't match this type. With JavaScript, if you don't match the type, it'll still compile, it'll still run, but then you may get a runtime error and your site may crash. So in my opinion, I think TypeScript sites are a little bit more well-defined. They're a little bit more secure. You can define the types, you can define how the interactions occur, and you can catch simple errors at compile time versus experiencing them at runtime. If you experience an error at runtime, most likely your site will crash and the users are going to be very upset. If I come back, you'll see now I have an array of planets, and planets is defined by my types. Must have a name, a color, a radius, and satellites. So if I come back, you'll see this works, and we can actually start pushing data into this array. Now, for the challenge, you could use arrays, you could use objects, you could use nested arrays. The simplest way is going to be able to implement an array like this. And then it says you need to have persistent data storage. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. And then you can literally push this array to the local storage or even to MongoDB if you want to use MongoDB, or some students may use Firebase. Okay, you can also push this data type to Firebase. And then you'll have a well-structured data type where all of the objects in the array are matching, because they have to use that type. If they don't match the type, they will not be allowed in the array. So we're going to create an add my planet function, which is essentially just going to push data to this planets array. Okay, at first it's going to be equal to the JSON file that we're bringing in. So if I look at that JSON file, you'll see each one has a name, a color, a radius, and satellites. Now, number can be an int or a double. So you'll see these are strings, and these two are number values for TypeScript. So they are matching the types, so they will be loaded successfully. And then we're going to create a function that's going to add more. So if I come back to the HTML, we actually did that right before we ended the lecture. We have add my planet, which is going to be a function. So when you click on this, it says add Pluto, but technically we can add just any planet. Maybe we should change that there, add planet. And then they can put whatever planet they want to add. Add Pluto was from the custom MVC lecture. We only added Pluto. And that's why add Pluto was there. But now we can add any planet. So I come back to the homepage component, we're going to add this in. So we're going to do add my planet. Okay, it doesn't take any parameters. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to say this, okay, this dot data, that's going to be the planets array, and we're going to call the push function. Okay, and we're going to push essentially a JSON object, okay, which in TypeScript this is just called an object. So I'm going to push up an object. It's going to have name, and we're going to grab the forms planet name. Okay, so we're going to dynamically set the name. Then we're going to set the color for Pluto, which is gray. Okay, the radius for Pluto is going to be 1186. And the satellites for Pluto are going to be 5. Now, later we're going to dynamically grab all this information. Right now we're using ng model. And if you look at the documentation for the challenge, it says do not use ng model. What I'm using ng model for right now is just to get a quick version up, just to see if I can get this to work and follow proper MVC architecture. Then I'm going to change ng model to reactive forms. Now we talked about the difference between reactive forms and template-driven forms in previous lectures. But you'll want to go over that because that's a requirement for the challenge. In the journal, you need to compare reactive forms with template-driven forms. What's the pros, what's the cons? And clearly define the differences between the two. You can even use some of the images there from the documentation, or you could draw some of your own images to depict what's the difference. So right now I'm using a template-driven form. Here in a little bit, we're going to use a data-driven form. So that's why I only have the name being dynamic. Okay, what we can do is we can log it to make sure it was added successfully. So I'm going to do a console log with the data that we added. And let's just see if we can get this to work. So if I run the page, if you do an ng serve, okay, you're going to do an ng serve. Let's see, we got some issues here. Homepage.component. Let's see, 10, 16. I was having issues with this before. Looked like I closed VS Code and opened it back up. Let me try to run it. I'm going to do a Command-Shift-R to do a hard reset. Still have an error. We can always look this up to see if there's anything. It looks like there's an error in the template, and it's saying get total planets does not exist. Okay, so I can't really search that, but I can look for it. So get total planets, it's looking for this function. It doesn't find it. Let's go ahead and add it. Okay, so I'm going to do a get total planets function. And all I'm essentially going to do is return this .data.length. That way the total planets is dynamic. I could also have a hard-coded value. Okay, just at first, I could do something like this, have a total planets up here at the top, which is going to be of type number, and it's going to be equal to 8. If you remember, we did UML in object-oriented programming. UML always put the name of the variable with a colon followed by the type. So this doesn't really bother me because it reminds me of UML from Java, object-oriented programming. But for some developers, they don't like this. They like to put the type first, then the name, then equals, and then the value. Okay, but you'll see TypeScript is not implemented in that way. You always put the name of the variable, followed by the type, followed by what it's equal to, the default value. So instead of having dynamic, I could return a variable. So I could say planets, total planets here. You see it put the keyword this for me. Come back, do a refresh. You'll see total planets is 8. But here if I do, let's say list, and I add one. Okay, this actually has no meaning right now because it's all hard-coded. But if I add planet, you'll see Nick has a radius of this with 5 satellites. So it went in there, but the planets did not increase. So you don't want to really put a variable there. It'd be better to have everything dynamic. To make it dynamic, I'll grab the array and then just calculate the length. Come back, do a refresh. It goes back to 8. We can add Pluto. Okay, do an add. You'll see it went up to 9. If I show a list, you'll see it shows the list view. If I do table, you'll see it shows the table view. And if I do system, okay, system isn't implemented yet. We still need to implement that. But the code is working. You'll see I didn't really add that much lines of code. But look how powerful it is. I already have dynamic updates on the display. I have two-way data binding if I need it. I can add into an array with the add button, so I have on click. And I really didn't add that many lines of code. Okay, you'll see that when I first load the page, the selection is blank. I can always fix that by implementing code here in the constructor. The constructor is called once the page first loads. So in the routing file, I'm going to go over here to the home page. Whenever this component is loaded, which means it's instantiated, it's created, then this constructor is going to get called. So the constructor is a good place to set default values. So if I want to set default values, for example, I can grab the selection and tell it what to equal to. So I can say this dot selection. I can say it's equal to select 1. By setting it equal to select 1, when I refresh the page, you'll see now it defaults to that value instead of being an empty value. When I click on it, okay, let it reload. When I click on it, you'll see I have the other values here instead of having the default value, which was nothing. Okay, and that's why we put select 1 in there. It's kind of like a placeholder. If I go back to the form, you see I have placeholders here. The placeholder for that drop down is select 1, and then we need to make sure we specify that. Okay, so the page is working. We haven't really built the system one. And in addition, when we get to total planets, we can also update this variable here. Instead of hard coding to 8, we can actually update the variable. We had 8 planets in planetdata.json. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's where the 8 planets are coming in. When you have Pluto, it's 9. If I come back to the controller, this is going to be our controller, the homepage controller. We can also update that variable. Let me say this dot total planets is equal to this dot data dot length. So we can update that variable, and then we can return the length, or we can return the total planets. Okay, you can choose which one, doesn't really matter. And that way it will be interpolated here in the view. Now I want to show you something really cool with Angular. Not only can you interpolate values, you can actually interpolate, so to speak, CSS. So on my switch case, whenever it's equal to system, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to have divs for the planets. And I need a for loop here. Okay, so I'm going to use a structural directive, ng4. And I'm going to say let p for planets of data. So we're going to loop through the data. And for each one, I'm going to have a div here, but I'm going to use something. I'm going to use a directive called ng-style. It's a really cool directive where I can dynamically update the styles. For example, okay, I'm going to have my brackets here. Here you can see 2 brackets here. I'm going to say whenever the width, okay, I'm going to grab the width. You'll see I have single quotes here. This is basically a JSON object, or in TypeScript we just call it object. This is like a JSON object. The key is width. The value is going to be the planet's radius. I'm actually going to do a calculation here. Divided by 69911 multiplied by 300. And I'm going to add a string to it, which is the unit called pixels. And I'm going to do a comma here. So I'm setting the styles with this JSON object. Okay, and I can actually move this to a new line. It may be a little bit easier to read. Next, I'm going to set the height. Okay, I'm going to set the height also to the planet's radius divided by 69911 multiplied by 300 plus pixels. So I'm actually putting formulas in for the styles. Last but not least, the background color. The background color will be equal to the planet's color, whatever they specify. Now I'm going to close this up. Yeah, I close it up with a close bracket, no comma after the last one, and the ng-style directive. And then inside this div is not going to be anything. Basically, the div style is what's going to draw the planet. So it's going to be like a circle. And you'll see the border, the height and the width are the same. So it's going to be a square. And then I do a border radius of 50%. So if I actually go to the styles, if I go to the homepage component CSS, you'll see here, if I scroll down, I have a border radius of 100%. Technically, the maximum is 50%. If you do 50%, you'll have a complete circle. And anything above 50% will still be a circle. So a lot of developers will put 100% here just because to be safe, easier to calculate, easier to see. just kind of a programming, maybe like a programming habit. Although 50%, we learned this in 2830, 50% makes a complete circle. So any class of planet that has a child of div, border radius will be 100%. So if I come back, you'll see here I have a class planet, and the child is a div. So the border radius will be applied to this element. And since it's a perfect square, because the height and the width are the exact same value, it will be a circle based off that border radius. And then in the span, we'll actually put the planet's name. So we're going to dynamically, it's called interpolation. We're actually going to go over this, these double mustaches here. These are called mustaches. They have a framework called mustache.js. They were one of the first to have interpolation, a very powerful framework. People still use it today. Angular took the idea and used it in their framework, and React also uses it in their framework. But one of the first was Mustache.js. We're going to take a look at that later on in the semester so we can understand interpolation better. But essentially, whatever the value is of this variable, it's just going to output it. So here's the key. It's going to output the value in between these span tags. Similar to this. Here's the key. Here's the value. The key is the planet's name. The value, whatever the planet's name is, will be outputted. So now if I save this and run it, do a refresh, go over to system. Okay, let it load. You can even do a hard reset just to make sure. If I click on system, you'll see it now works. Here's the div, which is the size of the planet, followed by the planet's name. You see I have a formula to make sure they're all in their respective sizes. You'll see how large Jupiter is compared to Mercury, Venus, and Earth and Mars. Okay, Earth is large, but Jupiter is really huge. And if I put Pluto, so let me type in Pluto, hit enter, okay, you'll see how small Pluto is. Pluto is very small. And some people don't even consider it part of a planet anymore. And that's why I didn't include it in the original list of planets. So we're almost done. Okay, you'll see if they select all, nothing displays. Okay, if you select all, we want all of them to display. Okay, so we would need to create the all case. So if I want to create the all case, I would have something like another div. So I can copy this div here and change it from system to all. And if I want to show all, I would basically just have each one listed there. So I'd have the unordered list, followed by the table. Okay, you'll see those divs are kind of just containers for the ng switch cases, followed by the system. Okay, so I basically have all three. If I come back, do a refresh, select all, do a hard reset, select all, you'll see the list, you'll see the table, and you'll see the system. If I go to system, you'll only see system. If I go to table, you'll only see table. And if I go to list, you only see list. If I go to select one, you won't see anything. If I go back to system and then add Pluto, okay, you'll see Pluto was added successfully. Now there's a few things left that I want to do. I want to add local storage. So right now I have 9 planets. You'll see when I refresh the page, it'll go back down to 8, which is the original number in the list. Okay, but we want it to remain the same. So if I refresh the page, the data will still be there. We're going to go over that here soon in the next few videos. In addition, we have everything in the controller right now. Okay, we have the HTML. So this is our view. That's fine. There's no backend code here. This TypeScript file is our controller. And this controller is actually modifying the data. Okay, but that's not following MVC. If I go back to MVC, so I could just search Apple MVC. Okay, you'll see model view controller. Here's the picture that I've been using. The view should talk to the controller, and the controller should update the model. Right now, I only have the view in the controller. I don't even have the model. Now, this is what I recommend you do to get the challenge working. But once you get it working, then you need to separate into a model. We're going to do that. In addition, we're going to change the template-driven forms to reactive forms, which is another requirement for the challenge. So we got a lot to go over. Stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.